911 emergency.
The inside of the house was scorched pretty badly.
This was an intentionally set fire.
He was stabbed multiple times. It was very much a whodunit.
My son told me, no, Mom, he's been murdered.
This wasn't a home invasion. It was somebody that was welcomed in. The video, I mean, you can't even hope for something like that. There's no way.
Where's she going?
It was shocking.
"56-year-old Andy McGuffey is cooking up a feast for his stepdaughter, Amanda, and his granddaughter, Lainey.
Andy came into my life when I was around 8 years old, and he had met my mom, and I immediately became his little sidekick. No matter what he was doing, he loved being in the kitchen.
It's tamale day. Let's eat.
Our favorite papa.
He would always call me and my daughter to come up and have us try a new recipe, and we loved it. My daughter loved her papa.
Andy's wife, Angela, isn't at tonight's dinner. She has COVID and is recovering at her father's house.
I got out of the hospital in October. They had forecasted some very strong tornadoes. And since Andy worked the night shift and I was on oxygen still, I didn't want to be there in our home by myself.
Okay, that's all done. All right, we're gonna head out. See ya.
Are you?
I did speak to him Thursday evening.
And? How are you, my love?
He said that he would be picking me up as soon as he got off work the next day. And we said, good night, I love you. And that is the last time that I spoke with him.
Okay, bye.
Next morning, Andy's boss calls Angela. Andy failed to turn up for his 1 a.m. shift.
I said, well, I'm very concerned because I've been with him for 30 years and he's never missed work and not called. My son, Josh, lives a few miles from our home, and so I asked him if he would mind going over to the house and just checking on Andy to make sure he was okay.
"911 emergency."
Blanchard police officers respond to a 911 call from Josh.
I think there's been a fire. I think there's been a fire. Who is that?
The patrol officer could see that there was scorching around the front door. He went ahead and went inside, saw that the inside of the house was scorched pretty badly. He went into Andy's bedroom and saw his feet at the end of the bed. Even though upon initial glance you couldn't really see how he had died, they were relatively certain that it was something that they wanted us to come out and investigate pretty quickly.
Agents from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation arrive on scene, along with the fire marshal.
Went into Andy's bedroom. He was covered up pretty well. He was stabbed multiple times.
I'm counting at least 11 stab wounds.
We observed lacerations and cuts to the head, to the neck, to the face, to the chest.
Because of the widths of the stab marks, it looked like more than one weapon that was used to stab Andy. We quickly came to the conclusion that Andy had been murdered.
Josh calls his mom, Angela.
It was really kind of surreal. because it sounded like he was crying, but my son doesn't cry.
Mom?
He said, Mom, Andy's dead. And I screamed. And I said, did he have a heart attack? And that's when Josh told me, no, Mom, he's been murdered. And, then of course I just lost it. And I was like, no, that can't be. That can't be. That just can't be.
Agents searched the scene for clues.
There was a recliner. And that's where you can really kind of first see the damage that had taken place because it was burned and melted. You can see this gigantic black spot on the floor. The boards there were just scorched. I mean, just completely blacked out. You also had rolls of paper towels all laid out specifically to try to spread the fire.
We noticed they were aerosol cans that were put onto the stove. Had the fire been able to spread into the kitchen area, the aerosol canisters would have made explosions. This was absolutely not an accidental fire. It wasn't a mishap. It wasn't a careless cook, a careless dropping of a cigarette. This was an intentionally set fire.
Whoever this was didn't have to force entry. I thought this wasn't a home invasion. This wasn't somebody that kicked in the door and just went to town on him. It was somebody that was welcomed in. Angela got on scene. She had an oxygen tank on. She was using a walker to be able to get around. My heart just went out to her because she was very, very sick. Angela told us that she had spoken with Andy the night before, around 6 or 7 at night. Then she was woken up the next morning by a phone call from Andy's boss saying that Andy hadn't arrived at 1 a.m. for work. So Andy was killed during that time frame.
Did you notice anything missing from the property?
Josh was able to pick up that there was a lot of property that was missing. There was like a laptop that was missing, purses, DVDs, neck massager. And Andy's white Toyota was missing. I found out that there were a large number of firearms that were missing from the house, including a pink BB gun. We talked to a lot of the friends, a lot of the family. There was nobody that was upset with Andy. There was nobody that had any kind of motive to hurt him or anything like that. So, you still don't have a suspect. It was very much a whodunit.
While investigators put out a bolo for Andy's white pickup, agents worked to trace the missing items.
Agent Gatlin just happened to think, well, I'll check leads online, a database for pawnbrokers across the United States.
Hey, Matt, we got a hit on the pink BB gun.
He was able to determine that a pink BB gun had been pawned and a neck massager had been pawned.
The pawn shop is in Kansas, nearly 300 miles away. Agents review the store's surveillance footage at the Kansas Bureau of Investigation.
Agent Horn says she was able to go to the pawn shop and get video.
Play it from when the store opens. There. What's that? Got the pink BB gun.
And the neck massager.
these two people.
The next morning, investigators receive Andy's phone records.
So what we were able to see there is who Andy was last talking to the day before the homicide and some of the messages that were going back and forth.
That's a lot of messages from the same number.
The text messages were trying to discuss how to meet up with each other.
Look at this.
Mm-hmm.
The tone of the messages was that they knew each other, but they hadn't seen each other in quite some time. Andy's conversation was very much a social form. Andy had even sent a picture of some alcohol that he was drinking at his house, saying, basically saying, yeah, sure, come on by.
Andy arranged to meet this person at his house on the night he was killed.
We got to run that number to the database.
So he plugs the phone number in, and we come up with the name.
Hey, Matt, you're not going to believe it. It's Debbie Senft.
Debbie Senft. But I'm like, hold on a minute. That is the same person from that pawn shop. And so, my initial thought was, who is this person? Why are they talking with Andy?
Agent Miller calls Andy's family to see if they know a Debbie Senft.
Hi, Mrs. McGuffey. This is Agent Miller from OSBI.
He asked if I knew who Deborah Senft was. And I had never heard that name before. Never.
Thank you for your time.
I didn't know, honestly, what to think at that point. What we weren't able to figure out is what kind of connection Debbie and Andy had. We don't know if it's a friend, at the very worst, a girlfriend or something like that perhaps Angela didn't know about.
Andy's family salvage what they can from his home.
I believe that going through the house and trying to clean up and everything, it's hard. It leaves a smell that you can't ever forget. We didn't want to put Mom through any more trouble since her COVID, her breathing and stuff like that. Didn't want her to be around the smoke. We wanted to see how bad it was first before trying to let her go in.
He had put so much hard work into that beautiful home. It was just taken away, destroyed. And that was hard. That was really hard.
Agents contact Andy's neighbors to find out if they saw anything suspicious on the night he was murdered.
During our process of interviewing the neighbors, one woman that we were able to talk with had said that her husband had noticed an unusual vehicle at Andy's house the night before. He gave us a lot of good information. He said that it was like a dark colored, like a charcoal four-door sedan. And my immediate thought was some sort of Toyota or something like that from the description that he had given. Another interesting point was that he had noticed there was a large black dog in the car as well. We looked at that as a potential source of further evidence. You think maybe the person that's driving that car could have something to do with Andy's death.
Agents piece together Debbie Senft's movements in the lead-up to Andy's murder. They find that she rented a gray Toyota Corolla in Texas 3 weeks earlier.
We were able to get the plate information for the gray car, get that to our dispatch and be able to have that entered.
Yep, I got it.
A buddy of mine within the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, he tells me there was an accident.
A patrol officer responded to a crash involving the Corolla at 6 a.m. the morning after Andy was killed.
They were able to provide, copies of the accident, the citations. So well as the video from that accident.
Here we go.
The vehicle had gone off the side of the road and hit one of the blinking signs that was on the side of the road.
How you doing? Where's Mom at?
She was heading to Petro. I was falling behind her, and then the tire blew.
You were following her.
I was falling behind her on the highway.
Okay. All
And
right.
the tire blew, and I didn't even have time to react.
He was able to provide the Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper with a name and date of birth.
What's your last name?
Musset.
Spell it.
M-U-S-S-E-T-T.
First name?
Zachary.
Z-A-C-H-A-R-Y?
Yeah.
Who is Zachary Musset?
Come on back to my car.
During that time, he called his mom to have her turn around so that she can pick up Zachary.
Hello.
Who am I speaking with? This is Trooper Mueller with the Highway Patrol.
You're speaking with Debbie Simmons.
Debbie who?
Simmons. That's my mom. That's my
Okay,
daughter.
I guess I have your son here. Was he following you?
Wait, did he just say his mom is Debbie Sempt?
I gotta pause it right there.
The person seen with Debbie Sempt in the security footage from the Kansas Pawnshop is Zachary Musset.
Mother and son.
19 minutes later, Debbie Sempt arrives at the scene.
Is it okay for me to get out and talk?
Yeah, you can get out and talk to her.
Debbie arrived. The conversation between the three parties on scene in that accident, which is, the trooper, Zachary, and Debbie, was none of it made any sense.
Thank you so much for calling me.
No, you're welcome.
My brother was the one that was supposed to be driving the car, but he went off with a friend and left us in the middle of nowhere. So we're just trying to get to the Petro.
Okay. Imagine that.
He knows that they're acting weird, they're acting sketchy. You can tell that from the trooper's demeanor.
Agent Matt Miller calls Andy's family to ask if they recognize the name Zachary Musset.
Matt actually relayed the name Musset. I said, wait a minute, Zachary Musset. That is Andy's nephew, who we haven't seen in 12 years.
My mom kind of lost it and she goes, oh my word. Debbie Sempt, that is Andy's half-sister.
I said, yeah, if you would have said Debbie Musset, I would have been able to tell you right from the beginning. I did not know if she had ever gotten married and that her last name had ever changed.
Our two suspects in this case were actually related to the victim. And that is what is really surprising. We had figured out that they had pawned items that belonged to Andy in Kansas. We then know that Zach was in an accident in Oklahoma City around 6 o'clock in the morning, the day after Andy was killed. But what we don't know is what happened the day of the murder, and that's our job to figure out.
Agents secure the GPS data for Debbie Sempt's phone.
Lieutenant Gatlin was able to plot out Debbie's cell phone locations and determine that she was, in fact, in the area during our period of time where Andy may have been killed, in between that 6 to 7 time to 1 a.m.
Hey, Matt, come look at this.
Around 6 o'clock, Debbie was at Love's travel stop in Oklahoma City, pretty close to Andy's house.
We better get down there.
Agents search the area around Love's for clues that might reveal Debbie and Zachary's movements during that time.
So next door to this Love's is a car wash. We go through the car wash.
Dave, look.
We actually find the victim's truck.
Bingo.
We were able to get a hold of the owner of the car wash.
Major Miller from the OSBI. We need to see your surveillance footage now.
The owner says, yeah, I've got video cameras all over that thing. I started watching the videos.
Load up the outside camera around 1:30 on the 15th.
I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get. At the most, I thought at that point to get, some sort of pinpoint location that I could get some sort of forensic information or forensic evidence for the case. What I never could have expected is that I would have videos better than that forensic evidence.
Wait, stop.
On the video from the car wash, it's around 1:30. You have them pulling in the Penske moving truck, but you also have them pulling in Andy's white Toyota Tacoma. You can see them parking Andy's truck and then parking the Penske truck at the car wash.
Switch to the inside.
Let's zoom in. And pause it there.
What you see is an inspection of several different weapons that are in the car. And Zach almost kind of taking stock of what they have. Some headlights appear towards the top of the frame.
Switch to the next bay.
Debbie then pulls the Corolla into the next stall over. So in one bay, you have the Toyota Corolla.
Switch back.
And then in the next stall over is Andy's truck. And then you have the Penske moving truck that's concealing what they're actually doing. They both look straight up at the camera.
Wait, what's that?
Zachary pulls out a knife from the truck, walks off screen, and then comes back wiping the knife off on his pants. That could have been our murder weapon. He was destroying evidence. They spend 4 or 5 hours unloading property into this Penske. Once you can kind of tell they're starting to wrap up, they're about to leave, they start wiping Andy's truck down in the anticipation that somebody is going to find it. And so you can see them kind of going through in their mind everywhere that they've touched, which is like, the handle on the camper shell, the door handle. You would never in 1,000 years say, well, yeah, I hope we've got a video of them driving it in and then trying to destroy evidence by wiping their fingerprints off everything. There's no way.
Debbie and Zachary leave the car wash at 5:30 a.m.
It's pretty clear at that point that there were no other suspects other than Debbie or Zachary. So that's when the decision was made to go ahead and type up that arrest warrant.
The family are left reeling after receiving the news that Andy's half-sister and nephew could be involved in his murder.
It was extremely difficult for me to comprehend because they had dropped so far off of my radar. You know, I mean, as far as I knew, we had no contact with them at all.
There were no words to explain how shocked we were that family members could do that.
It was hard to wrap my mind around all of it. Just to know that someone in his family was capable of that just made it too hard.
Agents ping Debbie's phone to pinpoint her location. It reveals that she's in Wyoming. Agents call local law enforcement to make the arrest.
Wyoming enlists a couple of their guys to kind of wait in a certain part of the state that they assumed that they would probably be traveling through. And they just waited for a Penske truck to come by.
You got eyes on him?
They confirmed pretty easily that Debbie was driving the truck, and then radioed their counterparts on the highway patrol.
When the moment's right, bring him in.
Hands where I can see him! Step outside of the vehicle slowly. Keep your hands up.
It was very peaceful. Neither one put up a fight or anything like that.
Slowly. Turn around, hands behind your head.
And we were able to get Debbie and Zach taken to jail.
All right, let's get this thing towed.
Debbie is one of the more unassuming people that I've ever arrested. But Andy was stabbed multiple times. So whenever you have somebody that was stabbed that many times in a brutal, brutal attack, you know you're dealing with a very dangerous person. One of the biggest questions that I had was the motivation, because at that point, you know, we had no idea what they might say.
Agents traveled to Wyoming. They analyzed the moving truck that Debbie was driving at the time of her arrest.
So we found not only his ID in his wallet with his debit cards and things like that, but we found, you know, one of the guns that was reported missing that we had a serial number for. We found a wedding picture. There was a large gun case, but there was all kinds of stuff, glasses that were wrapped in dish towels. And I thought to myself, why would you steal that? Like, if it was not nailed down, they took it.
Next, the agents interview the suspects. They start with Zachary.
The first thing that I noticed about Zach is that he was wearing the exact same clothing that he was in the Kansas Pawnshop video.
Zachary tells the agents that he and his mom, Debbie, were relocating from Texas to Colorado.
Zachary described stopping at different churches to try to get gas money, as well as looking for handouts for food or anything else that they could possibly get from the goodwill of others.
They paid Andy a brief visit on their way through Oklahoma.
I said, well, okay, well, what were you driving? And he tells me a four-door gray, like Toyota Corolla. So that shows you you're on the right track. The neighbors had told us there was a large black dog in the car. So I said, Chance, you had any dogs or anything like that with you? And he's like, yeah. So, you know, you have another little grain of sand that lets you know that you're on the right path.
So you stayed with Andy for an hour, 2 max, right?
That's right, and then we hit the road.
So what did you and your mom do for those few hours you were with Andy?
He told me that he was eating eggs and sausage at Andy's house, which was a valuable piece of information because we found plates of food that had eggs and sausage.
Agent Miller reveals to Zachary that Andy McGuffey was murdered and his home set on fire.
Was there some sort of disagreement? Did a fight break out? Can you tell me what happened?
But whenever we got to the part where Andy was murdered, he would just say he doesn't remember. So you move on past that until I show him a picture of him inside the pawn shop. And I say,
"Is that you?"
Yeah,
Who's that with you?
that's my mom.
"What were you guys doing?" "I don't know." "Well, let me show you some of this video."
Would you agree that it looks like you're pawning something?
"Yeah, what are you pawning?" "I don't know."
Where would you get that sort of stuff?
"I don't know." So, it's pretty clear at that point that even with, pressing or, whatever you can do or tips or tricks that you can try to get him to tell you the truth, that he's probably not going to.
Next, agents interview Zachary's mother, Debbie.
Debbie was certainly the leader of the two. I mean, he was her adult son. I mean, he was twice the size that she is in both height and weight, but she was definitely calling the shots.
Do you know Andy McGuffey?
She says, "Yeah, well, that's my half-brother."
Zach just told us you went to see Andy.
I just tried to point out what we already knew, along with some of the information that Zach had told us, to see if she would change her story.
"I ain't saying no more. I want my lawyer."
And what that ultimately ended with is her just asking for a lawyer. So the interview pretty much stopped after that. But by that point, we do believe that we've got enough information. So Lieutenant Gatlin and I charged both Zachary and Debbie with murder in the first degree and arson.
February 14th, 2023. Debbie Semp and Zachary Muzzett stand trial for the murder of Andy McGuffey. Prosecutors step through the events that led to his killing.
The night that Andy was murdered, what they ended up doing was parking the Penske at the Loves and then taking their rented Toyota Corolla out to Andy's. We know that they were at Andy's house. We had found the plates of food more than one person had been eating. One of them probably distracted them, the other hit them, and then they both stabbed him. So Debbie and Zach both then load up all of his possessions in his own truck and their car. We believe they probably moved Andy's body from the living room to his bedroom because of how he was positioned and how he was wrapped up in the blanket. And then they went to great lengths to try to set this fire to make sure that it would burn the house down. They go back to their moving truck with 2 carloads full of Andy's property in the late hours. They spend a long time unloading property from Andy's truck, and they leave around 5:30 in the morning. Debbie and Zach made it to Kansas, where the pink BB gun had been pawned and a neck massager had been pawned. They kept going north up through Nebraska. 3 days later, they were caught in Wyoming.
Hands where I can see them!
The motivation very much looks like it's just theft. They made it very clear that they were very short on funds at that particular time, and that was what they knew that they could do to get money. I mean, that's just to take somebody out of this world for all their possessions is just a hard pill to swallow. In the multiple times that I've had interaction with them, there was never any sign of remorse, never any tears, nothing.
The jury finds both Debbie and Zachary guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentences them to life in prison without parole for Andy's killing and 35 years for arson.
That was a relief. I'm actually grateful that that's the sentence that they went with. A lot of tears and a lot of smiles.
I don't think it's overstating anything to say that the videos of them unloading and loading stuff at the car wash was a nail in the coffin.
My brother was the one that was supposed to be driving the car, but he went off with a friend and left us in the middle of nowhere, so we were just trying to get to the Petro.
Investigators found no evidence that any of Debbie's brothers had knowledge of or involvement in Andy's murder.
I'm both sad and angry that Andy no longer gets to be here to watch all the grandkids excel in life, that they don't get to have their grandpa to go fishing with and have him cooking up his awesome food. He cherished all of his grandkids. I'm pretty sure my mom still cries every day. I'm almost positive she still cries every night. I know she's got the last voicemail that he ever left her. It would surprise me if she still doesn't listen to it every day, just so she can have his voice.
The impact that it's had on me, for certain, is devastating. I really think he was one of a kind. I used to say he was my whole package, my whole package.
The street is asleep when the cruiser turns the corner and the blue wash flickers over winter glass. Quiet homes, drawn curtains, frost pinned to mailboxes like white ash. A dog lifts its head but does not bark. Somewhere a baseboard heater clicks. The officers step out. Breath smokes in the air. The clock on the dash says 12:03 M. No siren. No show. A midnight knock feels different. It says this is the end of something that began so long ago no one believed the end would ever come. A porch light wakes. Steps creak. Inside, a bedroom window brightens. In that small square of light, you can feel 25 years shake loose from a town that learned to live with a question. One question. The question that made parents check locks twice, and kids memorize license plates, and teachers pause during roll call because an empty chair can grind a school day to a slow halt. The officers climb the steps. 3 raps on the door. Your heart knows that sound. It is a headline with a pulse. Midnight arrest, shocks community, cold case, Minnesota, 2000. It tastes like copper in the mouth. Before the door opens, go back. A 2-lane road, slipping past a frozen lake, pickup tires throwing gravel, a mailbox bent from someone turning too tight. Friday night lights on a field of hard dirt. Breath like steam above the bleachers. Her name was stitched on a letter jacket. Cross country from the fall. Debate in the spring. She liked thin notebooks and black pens. She wore a ribbon on her wrist because she liked the way it snapped when she walked. Her mother said, "Don't stay out late." Her father said he would fix the porch step tomorrow. She laughed. They kept the kitchen radio low so the weather could talk them into thinking snow was a personality. The town was small enough that the diner poured coffee for the same men at the same corner table, and they wore caps that announced seed brands and soda distributors and old campaign years. That night, the jukebox flickered. That night, a truck parked near the service road. That night, a street lamp stuttered, and no one thought a flicker meant a thing. The last person to see her said she waved, said she turned left, said she walked like she owned the dark. That is what confidence looks like in a place that calls itself safe. The last convenience store receipt printed 10:43 p.m. sour gummies, a bottle of soda. The clerk remembered her because everyone remembered everyone. Familiarity is a net until it is a veil. After that, nothing. The lake kept its secrets under a plate of ice. The reeds whispered for no one. Snow fell in flakes the size of dimes and stitched a clean seam over tire prints that would have told a story if they were allowed to exist 10 minutes more. The patrol car cruised once, twice, 3 times. The radio said routine. The radio lied. Morning came with the sort of light that does not warm. Her room sat open like a mouth. The bed was made because she was that kind of child. A poster on the wall, a blue sweater thrown over a chair. Her mother's hair went gray that year, as if a switch had been flipped. Her father started fixing everything that did not need fixing because a man needs a problem he can solve when he is being asked to die politely every day. The sheriff walked into the house and took off his hat and pressed the hat brim against his chest. He said, "We will find her." He said these words because that is what lawmen say when the air tastes like pennies. Then the town learned the rituals of missing, candlelight in the gym, flyers on telephone poles that curled when spring tried to happen, a hotline number that rang and picked up leads that were not leads, but the voice of a neighbor who wanted to feel helpful, and the voice of a stranger who wanted to feel important, and the voice of a liar who wanted to feel anything. The dogs were brought in, and they tracked a scent to the service road, and they lost it, where gravel gives up. The lake was dragged. The ditch was searched. The fields were cards in a bad deck, and they were all turned over one by one. A blue ribbon tied itself around the community and cut off circulation, and the fingers of that town tingled for a decade. Cold case. The words arrived slowly like frost at the corners of a window. First you notice breath on glass, then you trace a little heart with your finger. Then the gray spreads until the outside world is blank. The case went into a box. The box went into a room. The room went into a chapter of a building people walked past every day because there are groceries to buy and oil to change, and somewhere at the edge of the field, the first geese are arrowing south, and no one wants to stand too long in a shadow when there is still sun to catch. Time did what time does. It dulled, and it polished. It built a new high school wing. It closed the feed store. It gave the sheriff a stoop and a tremor in his hand. It gave the parents a new language, the language of anniversaries that do not celebrate and birthdays that do not happen. But not everything slept. In a drawer, the ribbon waited. In an evidence bag, fibers waited. On a shelf, a soda bottle waited with the stubborn patience of plastic. A young analyst took the box down because the state got new machines, new software, new ways to hear old whispers. The analyst was the age the girl had been. That fact wrapped around the lab like a belt. She gloved up. She breathed shallow. She told herself not to think. She thought anyway. She thought about how the world had changed and how some things refused to. The machine hummed. The peaks marched across the screen like tiny mountains drawn by a nervous hand. Patterns met patterns. Partial joined partial. The analyst leaned in the way you lean toward a story at a campfire when the wind is wrong and the smoke is in your eyes. A profile gathered itself. Not a name yet. Not a face. A number that meant a person. She walked it to the supervisor whose hair was white and whose eyes were tired. He said, "We will run it tonight." He always said tonight when he meant now. He sat. He typed. He opened the door to the big quiet database that keeps our secrets until one secret recognizes another and decides to speak. Hit. It is a word you never shout in a lab. You say it soft, like you are talking to a sleeping child. Hit. A name unspooled. Not a stranger, not a drifter. The arrow did not point to the city or to the highway or to the county line. It curved like a question mark and landed back where it had started. A neighbor, a helper, a man who had hammered nails when the community center needed a deck, and who had held a flashlight for the search party, and who had stood under a gym light while they sang into plastic candles. And he had cried because everyone cried, and because it is easy to cry when the whole room is one big tear. The detectives pulled the old maps. They circled the ditch again. They drew a line from the convenience store to the service road to the place the dogs had given up. They looked at the old interviews and saw the small shrugs no one thought were heavy. They heard again the sentence that sounded like a sentence and was actually a confession wearing the coat of a cliché. I saw her. She waved. She turned left. She walked like she owned the dark. He had said that line. He had admired how she walked. He had put his gaze in his pocket and kept it like a souvenir. Midnight, because that is when a mask is thinnest, and because the old sheriff, now retired, asked to ride along, and the younger ones said yes, sir, because this belonged to him, even if it did not belong to him, and because he had promised a mother and he had failed. And now maybe the promise had decided to come back and knock on his door and say, I am late. But I am not. Never. The cruiser lights did not spin. The radio was a whisper. The porch light clicked on. The door opened. He was older. He was soft in the middle. He said, what is this about? The lead detective said, we need to talk about the year 2000. The man smiled in that small, flat way that means a person is running an inventory of escape routes in his head. He said, it is late. The detective said, not for her. He tried to talk like a neighbor. He tried to talk like a tired man. He tried to talk like someone who knew how to sound sad. But the past is a meticulous thing. It keeps receipts. It keeps the wording of a lie and the angle of a turn signal and the exact depth of a tire tread where snow fell and then stopped. It keeps the ribbon. It keeps the soda bottle. The warrant opened drawers that had not been opened by anyone but him for years. The old sheriff stood in the hallway and listened to floorboards he remembered from fundraisers and church drives, and that one time a storm took down the big elm, and the whole block showed up with chainsaws and thermoses. He looked at the photographs on the wall, and the man looked different in all of them, but the eyes were the same, and the eyes were a room with the light off. They took him in quiet. The cuffs clicked like pocket change. The night opened a little. Across town, a kitchen light turned on in a house where a mother had learned to wake before the phone could ring so she could be ready for bad news, and for the absence of news, and for the fact that both feel the same. The call did not say everything. Calls like that never do. It said that we have a development. It said, please come down. It said, we need to talk. She sat at the table and smoothed the ribbon and felt the weave under her fingers, and for a second she remembered the snap of it and the way her girl used to sling it around her wrist with a laugh that cut through winter like a bell. Morning hit the town like a headline stapled to air. Midnight arrest shocks community. Cold case solved. The diner poured coffee hard enough to splash. Voices went sharp. Names were said in a whisper because saying them out loud still felt like summoning something. People remembered favors he had asked. People remembered how he kept the old pickup too clean. People remembered a scar on his thumb from the elm storm. People remembered they had not known him at all. He sat in a gray room and said nothing. His lawyer did the talking. In the other gray room, the evidence sat like small suns. The bottle, the fibers, the photographs, the map with the 3 points that make a triangle you cannot unsee. The old sheriff found himself alone for a moment in the hallway. He looked at his hands. The tremor had a tremor. He thought of the first week and of the lake, and of the dogs, and of the father who had built a new fence, because a fence is a thing a man can finish. He thought of the promise. He thought of all the years he did not say out loud that he had not kept it. He put his palm against the cool cinder block wall the way you put a hand on a shoulder. He closed his eyes. Behind those eyes, the service road stretched straight and thin and merciless. The snow began to fall again, small and steady, covering what it could and failing at the rest. Back at the house with the ribbon, the mother opened a window even though it was cold. The air bit, and she welcomed the bite. She told the room, this isn't an ending. She told the room, we do not get those. We get moments that thud and then float and then settle into the furniture. She looked at the chair with the blue sweater that had been folded and refolded and never worn again. She said her daughter's name. She let it sit there like a candle that does not need a flame to burn. The town will not sleep for a while. That is how shock works. It crackles, it flashes, then it chooses a corner and it waits. Tomorrow the reporters will come with their hair combed and their voices tuned to the pitch of empathy. Tomorrow there will be angles and graphics and the words cold case underlined in red. Tomorrow someone will say justice like it is a door that opens and then stays open. But tonight belongs to the sound of cuffs at 12:03 a.m. and to the long road back to a house where a porch step still needs fixing, because promises, even kept, do not repair wood. This is the voice you hear when you lie down and the ceiling is dark and the furnace ticks and the dog shifts and the world feels like the inside of a shell. The voice says the past is patient. The voice says we live beside it, whether we admit it or not. The voice says a ribbon can be a timeline, a bottle can be a story, a midnight knock can be a bell, and when the door opens, you understand that a solved headline is not an answer. It is a light turned on in a room you have avoided, and now you have to learn again how to live with what the light shows you. The room hums like a refrigerator left open. White walls. A table that has seen too many truths. He sits with his hands folded and his eyes on the corner where ceiling meets cinder block. He is not looking at the lead detective. He is not looking at the old sheriff in a chair against the wall. He is looking at the place where a spider could build something and no one would notice. His lawyer says, "We have nothing to say." The detective puts the soda bottle on the table. Plastic, scarred by years. A thumbnail cloud where the label used to be. The cap is new. Evidence technicians are careful like that. He glances once. Then he looks back at the corner. The detective says, "Your DNA is on this." The lawyer says, "It is a town. People share things." The detective says, "This was found in a ditch where the dogs lost her scent." The lawyer says contamination happens. The old sheriff stares at the hands. He sees a scar on the thumb. Elm storm. Chainsaw. He remembers the day like a bruise. In another room, the mother sits with the ribbon. It is in a bag. It is a bag inside a box. The analyst is there. She speaks softly. She does not touch the bag. She explains how fibers are like dialects, how certain blends whisper certain factories. The ribbon was common then, not special, but the knot is special. The knot is a signature, a way of looping twice that scouts are taught for tarps, and that fishermen use when wind is bad, and that one volunteer taught the search parties because he said it holds under pressure. The mother says his name without saying his name. The analyst nods without nodding. Outside the small window, the parking lot glows a bruised orange under sodium lights. Snow halos every lamp. The detective unrolls the old maps. The paper crackles. He places them like cards. The convenience store sits in the top left corner. The service road draws a thin bone down the middle. The ditch mouths toward the lake. The man glances again. He blinks too slow. The lawyer reminds him to breathe. He breathes like it hurts. The detective traces the route with the end of a pen. He says you told us then you went home at 11. He says we logged you there because your truck was in the drive. He says we believed you because you asked to lead the search on the service road. He does not say, why would a man lead a search where he dropped a bottle? He waits. The silence grows muscle. The heater clicks. Somewhere a copier whines and sleeps again. At the diner, coffee is a sacrament. Booths fill. Boots stamp. The headline hits phones like sleet against glass. The cook keeps flipping eggs because motion is a shield. A woman at the counter says she always knew. A man says no one ever knows anything. The clerk from the convenience store pours sugar and stares at his hands. He remembers the receipt that night, and the way she smiled like a person who does not know a timer has started over her head. He remembers who came in an hour later. He remembers a cap with a seed brand. He remembers a smell oil cold metal, a ghost of tobacco. He tells himself memory is a liar. He tells himself he is not a hero. He tips $1 and leaves before the cameras arrive. Back in the lab, the analyst cues an old tape that was already old when it was requested, a square of black plastic with its own weather system inside. The town bank had a camera in 2000 that looked at the intersection like an elderly neighbor peeking through blinds. The tape had been boxed and boxed again. Heat warps, cold cracks, tracks stretch. She threads it into a digitizer built 2 decades later to save things people gave up on. The screen wakes in snowstorm gray. Static chews the frame. She breathes on the lens hood as if warmth could soften history. Then the street appears, a ghost version. The light at the corner blinks heavy. The timestamp crawls. 2246, 2257, 2311. A truck passes. Headlights flare. The plate is a smear. But the bumper carries something. A sticker on the left side. White block letters on dark. The software rolls its shoulders and goes to work. The detective opens a folder with photographs that have become their own town mythology. Field, ditch, lake under ice. The blue sweater on the chair. He lays them out, but angled not like a horror museum, like a path you could walk with eyes down. He watches the man not look. He says you were at the candlelight vigil. You gripped the mic hard enough to turn your knuckles the color of printer paper. You said you would never stop searching. You looked at her mother when you said it. You added a detail you could only know if you had stood closer to her than anyone should. He lets that hang. The lawyer weighs whether the room can hold another denial without ripping. He says grief makes poets. He says you are reading meaning where there is only weather. A deputy in the garage examines a pickup that has been washed so often the paint looks polished thin. The warrant has teeth. Panels come off. Carpet lifts. Under the rubber mat there is a cavity. Not factory. Made with care. A rectangle cut, then welded, then covered. Inside a bandana folded 4 times. A button. A paperclip so rusted it is bled into the fabric. He bags everything. He photographs the empty as if emptiness were evidence. He runs his hand under the wheel well, and his glove comes back black with what is not dirt. Road pitch. Old. He thinks about the alley behind the community centers. He thinks about how trucks whisper crimes for years if no one asks them to shut up. The analyst freezes the frame. The sticker on the bumper blooms wider. Letters step into focus one by one, pulled by math and patience. The brand name appears. Common here, rare elsewhere. The left side of the sticker is torn a small triangle missing. The truck outside in the garage has a sticker like that, torn in a triangle. The analyst sends the still to the detective. His phone chimes on the table like a small bell in a quiet church. He does not look at it yet. He sits with the silence, because silence is where confession grows, or where a lie gets tired and sits down. In the house with the ribbon, the father is there now. He came fast and quiet. He stands near the window and watches his breath fog the glass like he has been brought to winter inside a building. He has the look of a man who built a fence, and then built another, and then learned fences are only lines on maps other people draw. He asks nothing. Questions have rusted. The analyst shows him nothing. She is not the kind of person who mistakes hunger for progress. She says, "We are working." He nods. He has no use for adverbs. He looks at the ribbon, and his hands remember how to tie knots that held canoes in wind that did not care about his feelings. The detective finally taps the phone. He glances. He swallows. He slides the still across the table like a card no one wants to see. The bumper, the sticker, the tear. The man's eyes dip before he can stop them. Reflex is a traitor. The old sheriff sees it. He has waited 25 years to see gravity land on a face like that. The lawyer begins to speak and then stops because a sentence can fix nothing if a picture has already started to do its work. The detective says, "Tell me about the service road." The man says, "I never drove it that night." The detective says, "Tell me about the ditch." The man says, "I never stopped there." The detective says, "Tell me about the bottle." The man says, "I never drank that soda." The old sheriff finally speaks. His voice has gravel in it. He says, "Tell me about the knot." Across town, the gym where they held the vigil is empty. The stage still smells faintly of wax and dust and old rope. A custodian walks the length of the floor and pushes a broom without looking down. He was there that night. He remembers the sound of plastic candles knocking together when people hugged. He remembers the man who stood by the door and reminded everyone to sign the volunteer sheet. He remembers how the man carried the boxes of flyers like he had rehearsed lifting that weight. He had thought it was kindness. He had decided now that it was theater. He brooms harder until the lines on the wood glare under the lights like teeth. The defense will say nothing is everything, that DNA travels, that fibers lie, that a sticker can be bought by anyone with $10 and a Saturday. They will say the tape is trash and truth cannot be pulled from trash without smearing it. They will question the analyst's age. They will aim at the old sheriff's tremor. They will make the mother's voice sound like a storm siren and pretend sirens confuse people. They will stitch a blanket from doubt and ask a jury to sleep under it. That is later. For now, there is a room, a table, a bottle, a still frame that will not blink. The detective shifts. He says you taught the search parties that knot. He says you tied it on flyers so they would not slip. He says you tied it on tarps in the rain. He says you tied it on the caution tape the day they dragged the lake. He says you tie it when you are nervous. He gestures toward the man's thumbs, both rubbing the seam of his jeans in the same rhythm knots are born from. The man stops. He looks at his hands like they belong to someone whose decisions he does not admire. The analyst sends another ping, a second frame. The truck's left tail light has a hairline crack that throws a tiny comet of light toward the curb when brakes are pressed. The garage deputy sends a photo back of the same tail light, same fracture, same comet. The detective does not smile. He does not gloat. He lets the old sheriff decide if he wants to be in the room for the question that matters. The old man nods. He stays. The detective says, "Did you pick her up?" The man says, "I offered a ride." He says it because the word offered feels like a life raft. He says she waved. He says it was cold. He says she was shivering. He says I was being kind. He says I dropped her near home. He says she thanked me. He says he went home at 11. He says the sticker came off years later. He says the bottle is not his. He says a lot of things quickly as if speed can turn noise into truth. Memory pushes back. The convenience store clerk remembers a wave that was not a wave, but a nod. The street remembers tire tracks under falling snow, brief and then gone. The lake remembers nothing it will admit in daylight. The ditch remembers a ribbon end fluttering for a second before it was pinned down by frost. The town remembers finally that night as a hallway it has walked too often, each pass rubbing the paint thinner until the drywall shows through in white wounds. The detective says we can drive the route. The man says he is tired. The detective says so is everyone. They take him out for a ride, no cuffs this time. Sometimes people talk when the world moves past them. The old sheriff sits behind him and watches his neck. Trees lean into the road and then back out like tall people listening to gossip. The street lamp at the corner still stutters when wind leans on the wires. They pass the bank. They pass the place where the camera used to live. They turn down the service road. The man's breath goes shallow. The detective says, "Tell me when to stop." He says nothing. The tires thrum over old repairs. The ditch appears on the right like a mouth again. The detective stops without being told. He rolls down his window and cold kisses the car hard. He waits. The man looks at his hands again. He says, "I did not mean to." There it is. The first soft crack after winter. He says it like a person confesses to breaking a plate. The words come jagged. The ride, the turn, the joke that wasn't, the hand that reached, the push that was not planned, the way the ditch pulled like a magnet disguised as a shadow. He says he panicked. He says he tried to fix the unfixable with speed and gloves and prayer. He says he carried. He says he buried. He says he returned with a shovel when the ground thawed and moved what should not be moved. He says it is not what they think. He says it was an accident. The old sheriff feels the seat press against his back as if the car is trying to stop him from flying forward into the past. They do not cheer. They do not exhale victory. They let the quiet come back and sit on their laps like a heavy cat that chooses you. The detective radios. The cruiser idles. The man looks out at the ditch and sees his face reflected in the smeared glass of time. He waits for someone to tell him what happens next. The old sheriff closes his eyes and sees a blue sweater on a chair and a ribbon that snapped when a girl laughed, and a mother who learned the shape of waiting. He opens them. The night hasn't moved. It never does. The road listens like it has always listened. The town keeps breathing because that is what towns do, even with a hand around their throat. The road keeps its breath as they turn the cruiser around and creep back toward town, tires whispering over the old scars in the asphalt like fingers tracing a story carved into wood. And in the back seat, his mouth opens and closes on fragments that try to be forgiveness and keep landing. As excuses, he says the snow came faster than the forecast and he misjudged the shoulder, and she laughed at something on the radio and he reached to turn it down and she pulled away and the elbow caught and the door swung. And the ditch did what ditches do. When gravity is hungry, the words tumble. A rattle of loose screws in a coffee can, and the lead detective lets the engine hum. Answer him, because machines are honest, in a way people forget to be. The old sheriff watches the mirror, where the red smudge of the man's face rides the same angle as it did when he spoke at the vigil and at the fundraisers and at the town hall rally, where someone painted cold case on poster board with strokes so thick they bled through and stained the table underneath. He remembers the stain and how it never came out. He wonders how many stains live under the life of a man who learned to sit at the center of other people's grief, like a host seating guests at a table he built himself, and the radio chirps once a dispatcher's voice threaded with caffeine and routine, and then they are rolling under the stuttering streetlight at the corner where the bank camera used to blink like an old eye, and they slide past the diner lights on faces turned to town that learned to read police silhouettes against glass, because news can arrive like weather and people dress differently for storms. In the garage, the pickup waits with its tailgate open like a grin that forgot why it started. The deputy has the cut rectangle and the folded bandana and the rusted paperclip laid out on a clean sheet. The camera clicks like a metronome. The chalk marks bloom on concrete where tires rested, where mud once flung itself into arcs under a fender and dried there and got sealed in by wax and habit. He scrapes gently and bags what is more memory than dirt. Now he thinks of how time is a meticulous thief and also an atrocious archivist, how it saves lint and forgets names, how it keeps a paperclip and loses a laugh. And he stops, because thinking like that puts you at the edge of a ditch. You can't map. He tapes the bag signs, the flap dates, the line chain of custody, written in a hand his first teacher would recognize if she were alive, to see that his loops never changed. On the edge of town, the field that had been dragged and re-dragged in the first winter now wears the short bristle of late October, stiff as a soldier's jaw, frost at the tips, like a congregation of tiny candles blown out mid-prayer, and the lead detective asks him one question, the way you ask a skittish horse for a step, not a leap, just a nod of consent, with wheels beneath it. Where do we start? And the man swallows and looks at his hands and looks at the ditch and looks anywhere but at the old sheriff's eyes, because there is a ledger in there, and it opens to the page with his name on it. He gestures a small slice of air, carved by a guilty wrist, just past the culvert. He says just past where the ditch takes a breath and dips, and the words just past are a key in a lock, because searchers remember the place. They always stopped. They remember that dip like an apology from the road. The detective radios for a unit to hold the spot for lights that do not flash, for tape that does not shout for a surveyor's calm and a coroner's patience. The night holds steady. An owl calls once from the windbreak like a question mark written onto sound. They do not dig in the dark. They learned that lesson when footprints in snow became poems for liars to recite. They hold and watch and keep their bodies between the sight and curiosity, because dawn can be a shield if you let it. And in that space before morning, the town remembers to breathe in short, hot puffs that fog up the inside of every story. The convenience store clerk sits on his couch with the television off because he does not want anyone else's narrative to colonize his. He stares at his receipt tape in a drawer and imagines timestamps like stitches. He can place the sour gummies at 22:43, the bottle cap at 22:44, the way her wrist flicked the ribbon at 22:44 and a half, the way the bell over the door made a sound that is ubiquitous and suddenly sacred. He pours a glass of tap water, and it tastes metallic, and he knows it is not the water. The old sheriff does the thing that is both duty and cruelty. He rides to the low house with the porch steps still cracked like a grin that learned to be modest. He walks up, and this time he does not take his hat off on the threshold, because he is not a messenger of uncertainty. He is a witness to a season-changing shape. He says, "We need you at the station, because morning will be a busy dog and it will jump." He says, "We think we are close to bringing her home." He says the word home like it has to earn its place in the sentence. The mother stands and does not sway, because swaying implies a lack of spine, and she has grown a spine from glacier ice, brittle and old, and capable of slicing through rope. She picks up the bag with the ribbon like a relic. The father reaches for his jacket, and his fingers fumble the zipper, because hands remember and keep their own archives of helplessness. They do not ask what changed, because the night doesn't like to be interrogated. They go, "Dawn on that field is the color of cheap paper, and strong T cameras line the road," because the words "midnight arrest shocks community" traveled from a scanner to a screen to a newsroom where someone practiced the sentence cold case, solved until it fit in the mouth like a candy that burns. Reporters speak softly in coats that look warm on television. The lead detective keeps them across the line because narrative is a pollutant when it spills too close to evidence. Cadaver dogs lift their noses and draw lines. The human eye cannot see ground-penetrating radar hums and send soft taps into earth that tap back with patterns no one in town had to learn. Until now, the analyst watches the screen where softly bright anomalies waver. The shape is not a shape, the void is not a void, but there is a signature, and the surveyor points, and the team with shovels moves like a single organism. Careful, slow, the old sheriff stands still enough to hear a worm move if such a sound could be heard. They peel the ground in layers as if they were waking a sleeping book. Pages of soil laid aside in squares that would make an archaeologist nod. The coroner kneels and touches nothing. The sun clears the horizon and strikes the tape, so it glows like an artery. Someone coughs, the town holds, and then there is a fragment of blue where blue should not be a thread first. Then the hug of weave, then a torn edge that could be a corner of a sweater or a rag or an omen. The mother does not gasp. Gasps are for surprise, and she has not known surprise for 25 calendars. She rests her hand on the father's forearm, and the motion is so small a camera lens would miss it. The lead detective whispers for the camera crew to step back. 2 more steps. Ritual words fall into ritual air. "We have something, we will pause." The coroner sets down flags like tiny suns to mark the puzzle as it emerges. Elsewhere in the building, the man sits in his box of white and tries to understand that days can end and begin inside the same hour. His lawyer arrives with the smell of cold in wool. They speak in paragraphs full of phrases that sound like weather reports. A system will move through. There will be accumulation. Jurors are human, and humans prefer shelter to storms. The lawyer says accident. The lawyer says panic. The lawyer says no intent, a phrase that has saved men who are made of different weather than this one. The lead detective returns once sets a small recorder on the table, presses a red button that has lit itself up in rooms like this since cassette decks were king. He says, "Do you want to make a statement?" The man says he will not. The red light burns like a calm heartbeat anyway, capturing air, capturing the way silence has a texture when guilt sits inside it. By noon, the road looks like a mood. Gray and thin and important, the state troopers angle cars in a way that says you can drive around, but you will feel it when you do. The diner fills and empties and fills again. Forks, find plates, and miss mouths. A teacher from the high school comes in and remembers the staff meeting where they rearranged bus duty after the girl vanished, and how they spoke. Like librarians rearranging shelves, quiet and efficient, and in love with order as a talisman against chaos, she whispers "Mat Tich Be An," because a student learning Vietnamese taught her the phrase last week when they were reading headlines for a class exercise, and it stuck behind her teeth like a seed. She says it again softly and wonders why saying mystery in another language makes it feel heavier and more tender. The excavation yields precisely what hope and dread conspire to expect, not a body like television promises, but a geography of presence buttons that match the kind sold at the thrift store where her mother had taken her to look for a jacket the month before. A plastic hair clasp with a tooth missing that the mother recognizes not with her eyes first, but with her palm, because she had pressed that clasp into a hand on a morning when the bus groaned and the zipper fought and time snapped, and near the root of the ditch's sloping lip a faint trace of the ribbon's dye. Kisses the soil. The analyst says dye migrates like gossip. It goes where liquid goes, and it doesn't ask for permission. They bag the earth itself, because earth remembers even when it doesn't tell. The old sheriff removes his glasses and rubs the bridge of his nose and sees stars float in the smoky air and believes for an absurd second that they are the same stars that sat over the lake in 2000. And then he laughs once in his throat, because of course they are, of course time is elastic and cruel. Charged papers thump into a printer with the rhythm of a distant drum. The county attorney signs the name they have practiced for years on forms that had been ghost drafted and redrafted, like letters to a person you will never mail counts add up like beads on a string. Second-degree felony, murder felony, disposal of remains tampering with evidence, a catalog of verbs that try to build a stairway up to a noun called justice bail is denied, because flight risk is a phrase that means we do not trust you with distance anymore. The arraignment will be quick, but not painless. The words cold case solved will ricochet through bigger rooms than this town owns. Networks will lower their voices as if whispering adds gravity. A helicopter will be suggested and then rejected, because the day is clear and the road that matters is lined with faces who can tell the story better than a camera can. In the station hallway, the mother stands with the ribbon bag and looks at the vending machine like it is an altar. The old sheriff reaches into his pocket and finds a quarter he's been carrying since the summer. The feed store closed, it is warm from his palm. He offers it like a small mercy. She buys a bottle of water because thirst is proof of life. And proof of life is its own battlefield. The father sits and reads the posted flyer about a neighborhood watch meeting that happened 10 years ago. He reads it all the way through. Like scripture, he folds it back on the corkboard with care. He does not cry because crying is an eclipse, and he needs to see the analyst approaches with a softness that took years to learn. She says, "We are careful." She says, "We will return everything we can." She does not say the word remains, because some words are knives that do not cut clean. The man is walked down the back hall with chains that speak in small coins. The old sheriff watches him the way you watch a stranger parallel park in a tight spot, not because you doubt he can do it, but because you cannot look away from precision when cars and lives are that close. The man pauses at the door when the cold reaches in and touches his throat. He turns as if to announce something, a final line, an epilogue to a play he directed for a quarter century, and then he loses whatever he thought he had and looks at the floor. The lead detective angles his shoulder so the camera across the street will catch the profile and not the full face, because privacy is not a reward or a punishment. It is a human thing in a place that keeps trying to be a headline. Afternoon folds itself into the town like a letter slid under a door. People step over it, pick it up, read it aloud at kitchen tables, argue with it, kiss it, burn it in sinks, and feel better and worse. The phrase "shak kong dong," someone typed on a social post as a joke to lighten the mood, becomes a chant in 3 languages in front of the community center, because grief loves company and languages love. A crowd candles appear again, even though the sun is up, because rituals do not consult clocks. A boy who was not born when she vanished holds a sign that says, "Bring her home," in a hand that will one day vote and fix roofs and tie knots. He will not weaponize a girl who wears a ribbon on her wrist, because fashion cycles through pain like weather ties it twice and does not know why that feels right and wrong at the same time. Evening will bring statements, podiums, a careful parade of gratitude and warning. Lock your doors, but also open your hearts. Trust the process, but trust your neighbor less than you did. The old sheriff will say a line he drafted in the quiet of his kitchen with the coffee gone cold. He will say a community is a net, and sometimes the tear is where the fish waits, and the room will swallow that because they need a metaphor that does not break their teeth. The lead detective will detail what he can and protect what he must. The analyst will not go near the microphone because the work does not like applause. The mother will consider speaking and then decide her silence will weigh more. She will stand with the ribbon bag like a headline without verbs, present and relentless. Night will settle, and the road to the field will exhale, and the owls will write their questions into the dark again. And in a cinder-block room where fluorescent light forgets to be kind, the recorder's red eye will still be on. A tiny sun pinned in a firmament of tile catching the slow animal sounds of a building that learned to breathe. Along with a town, the man will sit and discover that the absence of noise has a sound. The detective will file his report and sign his name and slide the pen back into a pocket where it will sleep like a harmless tool. The old sheriff will walk past the gym and hear the phantom of plastic candles knocking together. He will walk home by the 2-lane that curves past the frozen lake, and he will stop at the bent mailbox and put his hand on the metal and feel the cold write its honest truth into his skin. Missing mystery is not a headline anymore. Cold case is a stamp they will not remove. Solved is a word that does not fix wood. And in the small house with the cracked step, a mother will turn off the kitchen light and let the darkness be a room she knows how to navigate by memory, because some maps you keep even after the route is changed forever. They move him through the side door at dusk, because light makes a spectacle, and spectacle makes truth harder to hear. The corridor smells like disinfectant and wet wool, and the air tastes like pennies again. His footsteps stutter against concrete in a rhythm that tries to be steady and fails. The lead detective walks half a pace behind and to the left, the way you walk beside someone who could turn without warning. The old sheriff waits at the end of the hall with a stillness that could pass for kindness if you didn't know the miles pinned inside his shoulders. The courtroom isn't a cathedral, but people sit as if pews require posture. The bench creaks like an old boat. The flag hangs without ripple. The clock is loud in the sort of way you only notice when words are afraid to come out. The clerk calls the case number, and it falls into the room like a stone dropped into deep water. Everyone hears the splash and imagines the bottom differently. The man's lawyer says the word not with a crispness that feels like a blade laid on a table, not guilty to each count. A phrase that lands with the practiced weight of procedure and the unnatural lightness of a lie that thinks it can breathe underwater. The judge looks like a winter tree, spare and unblinking. She asks about custodial statements and chains, and the detective answers in sentences that fold upon themselves correctly. Neat corners, clean edges. His voice is the opposite of a headline. It is a ledger and invoice, a list you check with a finger and then initial. With ink that doesn't smudge bail is a question that dies in the asking. Denied flight risk danger to the community. The lawyer opens his mouth to say cooperation and closes it because cooperation is not a rope you can climb when there is a ditch stamped into the town's memory like a birthmark. Outside the courthouse, the wind has teeth, and the microphones bob like fishing lures in a nervous river. A reporter in a coat the color of fresh asphalt says the words cold case solved into a camera that blinks like it believes her. She makes her voice soft at the end, the way sympathetic anchors do when they hand you a tragedy wrapped in composure. The town watches itself on small screens and decides which angle looks true. The diner television hangs over the coffee pots like a tired moon, and a cook with a burn on his wrist switches it off because sometimes silence is seasoning. People talk anyway. Whispers shaped like question marks slip under doors and rattle around kitchens. That night, the community center turns its lights on and bodies find the old gym lines by muscle memory candles, again though the fire marshal raises an eyebrow and then lowers it, because ritual overrules code in certain terrible liturgies. The mother is there without stepping to the front. She stands in the third row. She holds the ribbon like a passport to a country she never wanted to visit and never got to leave. The father finds the wall and leans as if the paint might be a friend. The old sheriff says a few careful words into a microphone that still smells like dust and last summer's dance. He thanks, he cautions, he does not promise. He has retired from promising. He says justice moves like winter, it arrives, and you recognize it by the ache. The room nods because metaphor is the only language that lets a crowd breathe in unison. Back at the station, the analyst writes until her wrist complains. She prints labels with the tender precision of someone pinning names to butterflies and letting none escape. She signs her initials in tiny script on strips of evidence tape and feels the odd electricity of authority pass through a felt tip marker into plastic. She replays a frame of the digitized tape, and watches the cracked taillight throw its comet again and again. She tells herself not to watch it anymore because fixation is a cousin to doubt, and doubt breeds sloppiness. She turns to the spectrograms, lets lines and peaks talk, lets mathematics be the adult in the room. She thinks of the girl, tries not to imagine her running, tries not to see the ribbon flashing at a wrist in the roadside dark, fails and forgives herself because humanity leaks around the seals of training when the story is local, and your own face peers back from the glass with a 17-year-old's outline for a second before you recognize your hair and your mouth and the way grief chisels a person older than birthdays allow. The man sits in a cell where Cinderblock has learned to sweat. In winter, he discovers that routine has bones, and those bones will hold him, whether he kicks or not. Breakfast happens because it must light wakes. Whether he asks it to, he studies the scuffed floor and understands that men carry their maps on their shoes and gift them to rooms that will forget the roots, but not the pressure. He thinks accident, like a rosary. He counts beads until his fingers lose track. He edits the memory until it fits in his mouth. He trims the edges where panic cut through. He polishes the moments that could pass for kindness. The offered ride, the sweater draped over shoulders, the way he slowed at the corner, because she said the cold bit like a dog, and he said, "Let it bite my truck." Instead, he thinks how a story can be taught to sit to heal, to fetch sympathy, if you repeat it enough times with the right treats. He forgets the bottle, because forgetting is a trick. He practiced for 25 years until it became a reflex, stronger than thirst. And when he remembers, he tells himself contamination and coincidence and community ownership of flavors and plastics and touches. He tells himself a language of escape. And it speaks back in a dialect that sounds like the inside of a drain. The lead detective goes home and does not go in. He sits in the driveway and listens to the car cool. The engine ticks like a cricket trapped under a tin. He watches his breath make little dramas on the windshield that fade without consequence. His phone glows with texts that come in pairs. Good job, and how are you? He ignores the first and does not answer the second he thinks of the service road like a zipper that finally gave. He sees the map as if the town were a board, scratched by chalk, and a hand has just wiped a straight line through the middle. He thinks of the sentence, "I did not mean to," and how meaning and doing do not shake hands when a ditch pulls and a man decides to let the pull do the rest. He goes inside and stands in a hallway that smells like laundry and the crayon someone forgot to cap a light under a bedroom door, draws a rectangle on the floor. He steps around it because innocence is a country you do not march through in boots. He showers too hot because heat is a trick for pushing cold away. He sleeps without falling and wakes without rising. And the night fills the interval with a museum of almost dreams, small exhibits, sharp glass. At sunrise, the lake doesn't steam. It lays flat like a coin someone threw and forgot to check the side. Geese draw punctuation in the sky that no teacher could diagram without crying. A fisherman tests the edge, and the ice answers in notes that sound like a ship singing in a storm. He steps back, tips his cap to a ghost audience leaves, because the water keeps better secrets than a courthouse, and he is not in the market for new ones. The bank's old camera housing sits above the corner like a blind eye in a skull that has learned to nod at all the right moments. The new camera down the block sees better and cares less. Technology is colder, and fairness is not its job in the garage. The deputy catalogs the undercarriage grease with the calm of someone who knows that even lies drip. He swabs, he photographs, he speaks out loud dates and times and case numbers into a recorder, because saying them makes them truer to the ear. That will judge later. He thinks of how the man kept the truck clean, the way cowards keep knives sharp, as if readiness were a virtue you could shine on Sundays. The county attorney writes a narrative for the affidavit and edits it until it's both brick and bridge facts stacked tight and away across for the reader. He chooses verbs like a carpenter, chooses nails not because they're pretty, but because they hold. He resists the urge to say monster, where statute says person. He resists the urge to preach, where the job says prove the words. Midnight arrest, shocks community. Do not appear anywhere, because filings are not for headlines. And yet he hears the echo of that sentence in the way he pauses. After each paragraph, the judge signs the order for further excavation along the service road and for a warrant to obtain medical records from an injury clinic 25 years gone that sat 2 towns over, where a young man once stitched his thumb and told a story about an elm and a chainsaw, while a nurse wrote with the bored kindness of someone who had learned every lie that can be told in under 5 minutes. The order drops into a stack that will travel like a pilgrimage to offices that smell like coffee and toner. The law walks on paper in boots and suffering, and it walks today with purpose. At school, an empty chair still exists, but now it has shaped seniors whisper her name without the shiver of myth. The English teacher assigns a poem about winter and changes her mind, and assigns a poem about windows instead, because windows confess to being thin between worlds. Students write lines about glass and breath and reflection, and one writes about a ribbon, without knowing why that image landed in their hand like a bird that agreed not to bite. The teacher reads the papers, with the feeling that language is a ladder that reaches only to the second story of a building on fire. She grades anyway. She writes good image in the margin, and means I see you trying. Keep trying on the bus home. A girl ties her hair, and the snap of elastic makes 2 boys flinch for reasons they won't admit. Trauma is communal, like weather, and no one gets to choose if they bring an umbrella or not. The community center becomes a factory for casseroles, because grief eats, and casseroles are the architecture of neighborly endurance foil pans, stacked like supplies for a siege. Names get taped to lids to guide the pilgrimage from oven to porch to fridge to another porch. Someone suggests a fund, and another says, hush money is a hammer, and this is not a nail. Someone else suggests a memorial bench, and the mother hears the word bench and sees a ditch and leaves for the bathroom, where she stands with both hands flat on a cool sink and watches her face decide again to be a face. The father signs his name on a volunteer sheet out of habit, and then stares at the loop of his first initial as if it were a trap he cleverly set for himself years ago. Journalists drive in from the city with eyes like polished stones. They ask the diner for quotes the way beachcombers ask the tide for honesty. Some locals speak and discover the strange pleasure of hearing your pain reflected back with professional polish. Others keep their mouths shut and find silence. Tastes like iron, but satisfies like bread and anchor. Emails the detective a request for an exclusive at Sunrise beside the lake. He deletes it without malice because Sunrise belongs to birds and men with long memories. The analyst gets another request to talk about breakthroughs, and she replies that the data are not poems and will not be recited before they walk into the chain of custody. The old sheriff gets stopped twice on Main by people who want to touch his arm and say, "You kept your promise," and he smiles with the weariness of a man who knows a promise kept late is a promise, kept crooked still useful, still a beam you can lean on, but never straight again. In the afternoon, a tip arrives from the clinic 2 towns over because paper keeps its own weather and someone dug in a closet where old files sleep. Like hibernating bears, a note in a patient chart from February 2000 mentions a laceration inconsistent with the story told. Depth wrong angle, wrong splatter on sleeve. Noted the nurse who wrote it retired last year and keeps geraniums. Now the county investigator calls anyway, and she answers with the crisp hello of someone who has not let age blur her consonants. She remembers not the face, but the way the man refused local anesthetic and stared at the ceiling tile like a sinner watching for leaks in the church roof. She says she wrote the note because writing the note was the only weapon she had then against a feeling that smelled like a fuse. The investigator thanks her with a warmth he does not fake. The file slides into the stack destined for a courtroom, where it will be introduced without perfume and weighed without sentiment. A small stone on the heavier side of a scale that tips slowly and then all at once. Evening arrives quiet and finds the house with the cracked step holding still as if waiting for a photograph to be taken by an invisible hand. The mother unfolds the blue sweater the way you hinge a door. You know will squeal. She presses it to her face and inhales memory that has been folded and unfolded so many times it has become a kind of cloth on its own. The father sits at the kitchen table and draws on a napkin an impossible geometry, a triangle of places, and a 4th point. He can't stop labeling home and then crossing out and redrawing with a different angle for the line from the ditch he is not trying to solve, so much as he is trying to build a diagram sturdy enough to hold the day without spilling. The phone rings once with an unknown number, and they both stand and then do not move because movement has become a ritual. You earn. Night takes the town in its fist and does not squeeze it, simply holds the cell hums, and the man counts the holes in the metal bench and decides a number that is wrong. Because counting is not truth, it is comfort. And he is short on both. He closes his eyes and sees a flash of taillight in a bank camera window, sees a ribbon glint like a tiny blade, hears the old sheriff say, "Tell me about the knot," and feels the way his thumbs rub the seam of his prison pants in the same rhythm as tying his lawyer will come in the morning, with phrases that stack like sandbags in tension burden, reasonable doubt. He will build a wall and pray the floodline is lower than history. The lead detective will wake before his alarm and look at his ceiling and see not plaster, but the ditch, and decide to make coffee, because coffee is a small religion, and priests of small religions keep you alive. The analyst will dream a graph and wake with the taste of printer toner in her mouth and smile because she knows the brain stores the strange on top for easy access during wars like this, and somewhere between the inhale of the town and its exhale, a weather front slides through that no app predicted. Just a change in temperature you feel in your teeth when you step outside to take the trash. A thrum on the power lines, a softer sound from the lake. Geese revise their sentence mid-sky. A dog in a yard 3 houses down lifts its head and decides not to bark inside a dozen kitchens. People pause without knowing why, a collective muscle unclenching one notch, not a victory, not a finish, something else, something like a floor that doesn't give under your feet the way it used to, and the words "cold case," "solved" glow on phone screens in 100 palms, and then dim, and then sleep. But the story stays awake. It lies on the couch and stares at the ceiling and whispers, "To the dark, you still have to live with me tomorrow." And the dark, having learned its manners in this town, answers softly, "We know." They call it a thaw when the ground loosens its grip and lets you borrow what winter kept, but this is late October, and thaw is just a metaphor for cooperation, a bargain between dirt and daylight. So the team that returned to the service road brings both shovels and patience. The radar crew marks a second anomaly, offset from the first by a few paces, and a shallow dip, a signature that looks like the ghost of a suitcase. When the screen flares, they grid and peel and whisper the way people do when they stand at the lip of an old secret. The lead detective kneels and reads the layers like a calendar leaf. Mold-compacted silt, a bruise of darker soil where water pooled years ago and left its memory behind, and then a sliver of plastic appears, not bright, the color of a rainy day. The analyst leans in and names it without touching retail bag corner late 90s formulation, the kind that went brittle if you left it in a trunk. They tease it free, and the air shifts the way a room shifts when someone tells the truth out loud. There is a zipper tooth caught in the fold. There is the faintest scent of something that is not dirt, not now. Not anymore, but the brain wants to catalog and fails. The coroner tells everyone to breathe through their mouths. The detective does the opposite and breathes through his nose because he wants to remember the exact shape of the air on this morning for the rest of his life, because memory is an evidence bag. You stamp with a date and tuck away where you can reach it in court when the defense tries to turn the world sideways. At the jail, the man learns that time breaks apart differently. In a small cell, seconds are grains you can count with a finger if you're careful. Minutes are tides that roll in without sound and leave, shell lines on your mind. Hours are animals that pretend to sleep and then lunge. He sits and rehearses the accident again, selling the story to himself, because if he buys it hard enough, maybe a jury will rent it for a while. His lawyer arrives with a file that has grown around the edges with photocopies and annotations, like a hedge around a house that needs hiding. He says the word narrative as if it is a tool that can undo a knot. He says, emphasize panic. He says, emphasize shock. He says, say you froze, and then your body did what bodies do. He does not say what bodies do. When lies need oxygen, he tells the man to stop talking to the ceiling as if the ceiling can be called to testify. He warns him the clinic note will surface. He says a nurse with a clear voice is worse than a photograph because a photograph can be explained and a voice carries its own weather. he asks for names to paint in the background. Friends who will testify to kindness the way you spray perfume in a room to distract from a stain you cannot scrub out. When the analyst sits down with the knot again, she opens 3 tabs in her head at once: camping knots, rescue knots, sailor knots. She lays the evidence ribbon on a sterile mat and studies the loops like a fingerprint written in string. There is a habit you can hear, if you have listened enough, the way the tail lies under the bite instead of over, the way a second turn crosses at an angle that is taught in a particular manual printed for a search and rescue seminar. The county hosted in 1999, she finds the roster in a box no one has opened since the Y2K party that never delivered, Doom. His name sits 2 lines above the old sheriff's A Civic Goodwill game that planted a technique in his hands he would later use to cinch a tarp against wind and to tie a ribbon that should have been harmless and was not. She writes it in her report with the cool temperature of lab language, and then puts the pen down and lets herself lose that temperature for exactly 10 seconds. Palms pressed to her eyes until stars swim. She times it. She returns to work because the work deserves steadiness. The lead detective drives to the clinic 2 towns over because paper has already traveled by fax and scan, but walls tell stories and smells that never leave disinfectant coffee too old to be a comfort, sun-baked blinds that catch dust like Morse code. The retired nurse has come in because she said she would geranium soil under her nails' voice like clear glass. She walks him to a back room that is used for storage now and points to the ceiling tile that had leaked that winter, because the roof was cheap and the fix was delayed. She remembers the man staring at the stain while she stitched. She remembers the blood pattern on his sleeve that did not match the elm story. She remembers that she wrote the note because notes are what you have when you are not allowed to have instincts on a chart. She says no one listened. Then, because the world was noisy with other emergencies, she says she brought cookies to the vigil and could not eat them. The detective thanks her and does not promise anything because he has retired from promises too. He offers a pen for a formal statement, and she laughs and pulls one from behind her ear like an old magic trick that still works. Back at the field, the second anomaly yields small things. First, a button with a tiny nick, a hair clasp that has lost its spring and looks exhausted, a coin that may not belong but found its way here. Because gravity is lazy. The coroner marks and lifts and speaks in a voice that could lull a swarm. The mother stands beyond the tape and her breath makes no visible cloud because she is a furnace running on quiet fuel. The father watches the surveyor mark angles and steps closer. When allowed numbers are a lifeline for men who cannot fix what needs fixing, he asks what the depth means, and the surveyor tells him without lies. The depth means careful hands put something down, and then put something on top, and then pressed, and then left. The old sheriff stands between them and the reporters like a windbreak, not because he is the hero of this angle, but because he knows where to place his body to make the least damage for other people. A habit learned from years of funerals and traffic stops and gym microphones, the town eats news the way it eats casseroles for comfort and for shared weight. The diner is a bulletin board pinned by elbows and knuckles, and the soft thud of coffee mugs landing a kid in a varsity jacket reads a thread aloud and translates it for an old man who has never owned a smartphone. The words "cold case solved" sit in that kid's mouth like a dare. Solved is a nail he wants to swing at. The old man nods and says, solved is not a door. You close and walk away from solved is a light you leave on in a room because you know you will have to walk through again. He says it with the patience of a person who has outlived 3 warnings about the end of the world and found the end to be smaller and closer and more personal each time. Inside the evidence room, the bottle sits like a small moon on a metal shelf. The analyst swabs the cap again, not because it needs swabbing, but because repetition is a sacrament in this church. She sends a sample out for a new type of assay the state partnered on last year that looks for skin cell microdebris in plastic threads, a technique so persnickety it could be accused of pettiness if it weren't about stakes like these. She builds a cross table for trial in her head. Whether or not she will ever sit under the lights to deliver it, she hears the defense questions and hands them answers that don't flinch. Contamination probability chain, all the choreography that keeps truth walking across a slick floor without falling. At the prosecutor's office, they storyboard the case the way you would a small, brutal film that you wish you never had to shoot opening shot a bank camera. Static, a cracked taillight throwing its comet, cut to the service road under snow, the map turning on the table like a night sky cut to the bottle, and the ribbon, and the knot, and the clinic ceiling tile with the stain. They argue about whether to put the mother on first or last or not at all, because her body is a testament and a target. And they need justice, more than they need television. The county attorney says, keep the engine cold, no heat, no melodrama. We do not owe them a cry, we owe them a verdict. He practices his first sentence and deletes it, and practices another. He decides to start with the ditch because the ditch has always been the only honest narrator in this story. The man lies awake and listens to the sound a jail makes when everyone else fails at sleeping. 2 pipes cluck like pigeons, someone coughs 3 times. Someone prays in syllables that have traveled oceans. He thinks of his truck like a friend he betrayed by letting it speak. He thinks of the sticker and its torn corner, and how he never thought a piece of adhesive could be a handwriting sample for a machine. He imagines the service road the way it was the night when he was 25 younger and believed himself equal to the dark. He remembers the weight that was not heavy until it was the slide of boots on icy grass. The sick cleverness of pressing and covering. He tells himself again that it was not what they think. He tells himself again that he's not a monster because he does not recognize his reflection in that word. He tells himself again and again until the phrase has no taste, just texture, like chewing a napkin. In a small house on the other side of town, a woman opens a shoebox of newspaper clippings she has kept under a bed where dust writes its own literature. She wasn't family, but she cared, because proximity makes people adopt each other's tragedies like stray dogs. She smooths a page that carries the headline from the first winter missing teen and mouths the words like a spell. She has added last night's story to the top of the stack. Midnight arrest shocks community. She laughs once because the community had been permanently shocked 25 years ago, and the electricity never stopped twitching. She writes a note in the margin for no one to read. Bring flowers when this is done, and she folds the page, because folding is a way of praying. The lead detective watches a tech unspool drone footage not for drama, for geometry. The drone shows the service road as a pencil. Drawn by a shaking hand, it shows the ditch as a seam. It shows the culvert as a throat. He asks for distance calculations between the 2 anomalies. The tech reads the numbers, and the detective feels the old satisfaction of pieces that refuse to dispute each other. He studies the approach angles and imagines how a person would park if they wanted to use the truck as a shield to the road. A man who has helped build a deck knows about sight lines and cover and where to put a post to hold weight. Without drawing eyes, the detective tags the parking spot on the footage, and it sits there like a thumbprint pressed into film. By late afternoon, a lead the town forgot it ever had returns like a boomerang. Someone threw in a different season, a high school boyfriend who had been discounted back then because his alibi was loud and his grief was messy, sends an email from 3 states away. He says he remembered a thing he never said because no one asked the right question. A winter campout behind the community center where people practiced tying knots because the rescue seminar gave out free cocoa, and the girl had laughed at how fast the man's hands moved and how cocky he was, and she had tried to copy the move and got it wrong, and he had leaned over her wrist and tied the ribbon for her and said, "There, that will hold." The boyfriend apologizes for remembering too late. The detective replies that late is not. Never he calls and asks for a sworn statement. The voice on the other end is raw wood and road noise. The detective thanks him with a word that feels insufficient and heavy at the same time. Evening slides down the side of the courthouse like a shadow learning to walk on elbows. The judge signs an order to collect soil from under the man's lawn, where a neighbor remembers a patch that never greened. Right after that winter, the neighbor had chalked it up to salt and tires and the meanness of cold. The warrant turns the memory into a coordinate. A team goes with clean shovels, and one of them hums a hymn under a scarf, because humming is a small guard against what you might find. They lift sod like carpet and bag dirt like currency. The neighbor watches from a window and flinches at his own reflection because his face looks guilty with relief. He texts no one because he is not sure if a person is allowed to feel lighter when weight leaves the wrong yard. The press conference at night is a tightrope over a crowd. The county attorney keeps his engine cold. He lists, he names, he thanks, he asks for patience that is not blind and vigilance that is not paranoid. He says the words cold case and solved in the same breath because the world will say them anyway. He puts a period after each and refuses to make either a drumbeat. The lead detective outlines a timeline that does not turn into a movie trailer. The old sheriff stands to the side with hands that have learned to be still. The mother steps forward only to stand a geometry of presence that rearranges the room cameras, quiet themselves the way dogs do when a larger dog pads in. A reporter asks if this means closure. The mother says the door was never closed. We are just learning how to walk through it without falling. Her voice does not break. It bends and straightens like a blade that has been tempered. Night takes its seat again over the lake and the power lines and the bent mailbox and the service road and the gym where candles have been blown out and relit enough times to own their soot. The analyst stays late and prints labels until the machine stutters. She fixes it with a smack, because some machines still believe in that language. She writes a note to herself on a sticky square recheck dye migration against soil pH. She tacks it where she will see it. With her first coffee, the lead detective drives the long way home past the bank corner and touches the steering wheel once at the exact spot where the cracked taillight showed its comet on the digitized tape, a private salute to a pixel that refused to forget. The man lies down and counts a different set of holes above him, and for the first time the ceiling does not hold. It waves and breathes and becomes a ditch, and he closes his eyes hard enough to see fireflies that are only blood. He opens them because darkness is a country he thought he owned, and it has revoked his visa. Somewhere a child asks why the word solved does not feel like a party, and a parent says because some answers make bigger questions. Somewhere a teenager ties a ribbon around a wrist and tightens it twice and then loosens it and reties it with a different knot because her hands learned something they did not ask to learn. Somewhere a teacher rewrites a lesson plan to include the sentence, "Headlines are not endings." Somewhere the old sheriff stands on his porch and fixes the cracked step at last, not because wood deserves justice, but because it deserves care. He sands and fits and taps a nail in with the slow joy of finishing an honest task in a world full of dishonest ones. In the morning, he will put on a coat and go back to the station to sit with a mother who does not need him but allows him, and he will sit in the chair by the vending machine and listen to the hum of fluorescent light and the slow animal breath of a building that has learned to keep a town alive while it heals. And the voice you have been hearing, the one that moves like cold air under a door and like warm light over a table, will keep talking, because the story is not over, because solved is not a finish line, but a sign on the road that says, keep going, because a cold case warms in stages, and each stage requires witnesses who do not look away. They start early because morning is a solvent, and because the service road has learned to give up small honesty. If you ask before the day builds its noise, the team walks the ditch line with flags and soft steps, breath hanging in front of faces like speech bubbles with nothing printed. Yet the lead detective carries a clipboard not because he likes paper, but because paper reminds you to be linear, and nothing about this has been linear for 25 years. He reads the grid again, he assigns lanes. He points to the culvert throat that looks like a mouth willing to talk, if addressed. Politely, the analyst kneels at the first square and runs gloved fingers over soil that remembers being pressed by a boot that belonged to a younger version of a man now pretending he can edit the past. She lifts a handful and lets it fall. The grains whisper a sound that is almost rain and almost static. She smiles without humor and writes the pH on a tag because science is a metronome that keeps a heartbeat honest when a town wants to rush. At the jail, the man learns that fluorescent light does not forgive faces. It carves them into maps he shaves by feel, because the mirror is scratched into an ocean. He listens to the corridor wake and tries on sentences the way a thief tries on coats does. This one conceal, does this one pass? His lawyer will arrive with words like architecture. We will build a narrative with scaffolds and load-bearing points. We will install doubt like a beam across a span of 12 minds. We will remind them that intent is not a guess but a castle. They must see and touch. The man nods and pictures the service road anyway, the way the truck idled that night, like it had a sore throat, the way his thumbs worked the ribbon just to keep his hands from shaking, and how he had admired the neatness of the knot without admitting why he closes his eyes and repeats accident like a lullaby. He opens them and the word has no milk in it, only metal. The county attorney moves chess pieces that are not wood, but people in days and laws. He schedules a preliminary hearing that will read to the town like a trailer. Even though he has sworn off dramatics, he drafts the witness list and scratches out 2 names because pain is not always probative. The retired nurse stays the analyst, stays the deputy who found the welded cavity under the mat, stays the boyfriend calling from 3 states away will be asked to testify later when the big room breathes slower and the story can hold the weight of his memory. Without snapping, he prints exhibits. The cracked taillight, still the drone overhead geometry, the clinic note with that line about angle and depth that slices through excuses like a utility blade. He drinks coffee that should have been thrown away an hour ago and thanks it because some bitterness is useful. The old sheriff parks 2 streets over from the courthouse because habit says, don't make a target out of a door you use. He walks past the bakery where sugar and yeast and heat collaborate to convince a town that life is ordinary. He buys nothing. He keeps moving. The bench outside has frost edging the metal like lace. He remembers the first winter and the way the bench by the lake collected bodies at dusk like a magnet. People who needed to sit near water to not drown on dry land. He remembers saying, we will find her into too many microphones. He remembers turning off his radio once at midnight and hearing nothing but his own breath. Make small lies in the cab of the truck today. He will sit behind the mother and the father and be furniture sturdy. Quiet, ready to take a hand that reaches back without looking. At the field, the anomaly they marked yesterday becomes a story told in inches, a zip bag corner, a zipper tooth, the ghosted die that is shy in this soil compared to the first square because water moved differently here. The coroner narrates in a low river voice that pulls everyone along without spray. This square was shielded, this square was not troubled by animals, this square kept its geometry like a stubborn secret. The analyst logs and labels, and here's the questions. The defense will ask, could the die have come from another source? Could the clasp belong to a different season? Could the plastic have drifted? She tightens each answer with the patience of a seamstress, stitching shut a seam. The world wants to pick at. She is tired in the fingers and steady in the mind. She thinks of the girl's age as a number that never got to change and lets herself be angry for exactly 3 breaths because anger left wild will topple your trays. Inside the diner, a priest and a mechanic argue about the word closure. One says it is a myth sold to people who have not met grief up close. The other says it is a tool that can tighten a bolt enough to stop a rattle. They settle on a third word, balance and eat eggs like there is virtue in protein. A teenager at the counter scrolls and reads a headline translated by a friend into Portuguese and then into Vietnamese and then back to English. The words cold case, solved, survive every swap, like a bone that will not snap. He looks up and sees the mother through the window crossing the street with the ribbon bag, and he stands without knowing why and holds the door. She nods a small thanks, and the hinge sighs like a relief it cannot name. The preliminary hearing opens like a mouth learning a language after a stroke. Slow, careful, every syllable deliberate. The county attorney calls the analyst, and she steps into the box with the posture of someone who knows. Posture becomes armor when the first question tries to find a seam. She explains chain of custody, like a recipe anyone could cook if they were patient. She names tests without turning them into magic. She draws the link between the bottle and the ditch, and the man's DNA, without doing violence to probability. The defense attorney is courteous with edges. Could transfer occur? Yes, does it always? No, did you guard against it? Yes, how lists, spill gloves, masks, negative controls, duplicates, blanks. The judge watches and writes notes so small they look like stitching in the back. A reporter counts how many times the word cold enters testimony without ever becoming the weather in the room. The retired nurse speaks in sentences that have no flourishes and therefore cut deep. I stitched, the sleeve was marked, the story told to me. Did not match the way the cut lived on the thumb. I wrote it down. I kept my voice. I came today because the note deserved a mouth. The defense asks about memory, and she says memory bends until paper holds it in place, and I kept the paper. The courtroom breathes after she steps down as if someone cracked a window. The old sheriff closes his eyes and thanks the version of himself in 2000 who kept his temper when a young officer turned paperwork into a joke and he shut it down with a look that meant, keep every scrap, because you never know which scrap will be the key you need when the lock shows up a decade late. In the break, the lead detective stands at the window and does not look outside because the glass throws back his face and he wants to study that map. The lines under the eyes like roads. No one paved the ghost of a smile that visits and leaves like a stray. The prosecutor joins him and says, "We are inside the lines." The detective nods and thinks of the service road anyway, because a case is not just evidence and law, it is also a geography. You carry into sleep, he drinks water. Because coffee will jump his heart, and he needs his heart. Quiet. The mother sits with the ribbon bag in her lap and stares at no one. The father clasps his hands and makes a cathedral out of fingers, and no God steps in, because some rooms are built for humans to learn how to stand without leaning. Back at the garage, the deputy pulls a panel he has looked at 5 times already, and finds what obsession is for one staple that shouldn't be where it is piercing carpet into metal, where factory glue failed. Long ago, he bags it not because a staple holds a story, but because stories hide in hardware when they are tired of obvious places. He writes the time with the blocky slowness of a man refusing to let a number be misread. He places it on the stainless shelf and tells it aloud, staple under rear seat passenger side oxidation, consistent with long-term placement. No visible fibers photographed in situ. He speaks like a monk, copying a text in a winter monastery, because ritual matters or everything melts. The man walks back to the room after the break and makes the mistake of looking at the gallery. He sees a face he used to borrow a lawnmower from. He sees a teacher who once asked him to hang lights for a fundraiser, and he had done it with a speed that looked like generosity, and was mostly a need to be seen as useful. He sees the mother and looks away so fast his neck pops. The defense lawyer leans in and says, "Keep your eyes front." The man nods and stares at a knot in the wood of the defense table and hates the word knot because it is treasonous. Now the judge returns, the county attorney calls the deputy from the drone team, and the room rides along overhead again. Altitude makes the road look like a line on a palm, and everyone tries to read it at once. Afternoon draws down, and the judge binds him over. The phrase is dull and final, like a lid closing on a box you have to carry. The defense asks for a reduction of charges, and the judge says no. In a tone that could shave hair dates are set, motions will be filed, the town will learn the difference between hearsay and history and hate the lesson because it seems designed to protect the wrong people. The man is led out a different door than he entered, because the courthouse remembers how to shepherd anger and keep it from becoming a stampede. The old sheriff feels the relief land in his shoulders in a way that is almost pain. He tells the mother he will drive behind her to the house, and she says okay, because the word okay can be a life raft, even when you do not believe it floats. The analyst returns to her lab and finds the assay report waiting like a small door she forgot to open. She reads it once, twice. The language is cautious, the way good language is detected. Microdebris consistent with epidermal cells within cap threads. Low quantity, high specificity, control negative. She exhales and the room feels taller. She prints a copy and puts it in a folder that will grow teeth when it needs to. She takes 1 second to let her face soften and then puts it back where it belongs. The steady place, she writes a note to re-interview the clerk with the receipt, because sometimes a voice heard after a piece of paper speaks will say the one detail that makes 12 heads lean forward at the same time. Evening stitches itself over town with long thread and few knots. The community center lights 2 candles, and then 6, and then 20 without announcing a vigil, because announcements started to feel like invitations to perform grief, and no one wants to perform anymore. They want to stand to breathe, to let silence, granular and heavy, settle on shoulders like shawls. The mother holds the ribbon bag not like a relic now, but like a new passport proof of belonging to a country that recognizes your loss as a citizen. In good standing, the father thanks the custodian who opens the doors, and the man waves him off and looks at the floor because he has been cleaning this gym since the first winter, and he would like to retire from this specific mercy. The lead detective drives past the lake because the lake tests him. It is a mirror and a lie. It reflects what you bring to it, and it always refuses to give back what you most want. He stops anyway and steps out, and the ice sings in those low submarine notes that make a man believe the planet has a throat. He thinks of promises, the ones he made out loud and the ones he made privately to a name he had never said in his house, because names spoken unpack themselves and take space, and he was afraid to give this case so much room it would crowd out his life. It took the room anyway. He whispers thank you to nobody, like a fool, and feels better, because foolish gratitude is healthier than clever despair. He gets back in the car and lets the heater lie that it can make the world warm. Night lays down, and the jail lays down a different kind of quiet. The man lies flat and hears the building settle. Like an animal content after eating, he counts holes again and then stops and counts breaths, because breaths matter for people who want to keep waking up in rooms they cannot choose. He remembers the boy with the sign outside the community center, "Bring her home," and feels for the first time the precise shape of the phrase "home like a blade" laid cold against his throat. He turns to the wall and thinks of a driveway, a porch light, a kitchen with a radio low, and a sweater over a chair. He thinks of how nothing he says will return those dimensions to their owner. He tells himself, accident one more time, and hears it refuse him. And somewhere, the town's machinery, its radios and lights and fridges and furnaces, sings a hum that sounds like endurance, a long, low chord beneath headlines and hashtags, beneath motions and hearings, beneath casseroles and candles, and the voice you are hearing call it the road, call it the ditch, call it the ribbon laid flat on a table under clean light, keeps talking. Not because it loves the sound of itself, but because telling is how you carry a weight without dropping it. It says, keep your eyes on the lane. It says, do not take your hands off the wheel. Just because solved is printed in bold. It says, winter is long and justice walks. It does not run. It says, we are still moving, and the town hip deep in the slow current of a thaw that is metaphor and muscle nods and steps again. They take the lawn first because earth remembers what men forget. A square of sod lifted like a rug and rolled back with the sound of unfastening the neighbor watches from a window, with hands pressed to glass as if the pain could keep his relief from leaking into the cold. Cadaver dogs blink at daylight and then lower their noses into the seam where green ends and dark begins. One paw steps, one paw freezes, the head tilts, the lead detective raises a finger, and the world within 30 feet shrinks its breath to a whisper. The alert is not dramatic. It never is. It is a small gravity in a small body that says here, and the shovel-fine soil that packs too neatly a straight line in the wild geometry of roots. A geometry that means fingers arranged, this not frost. They peel until a rectangle appears, shallow, careful a coffin. For small truths, the deputy reaches in and lifts a tin the size of a book-hinged rust kist, taped once with a strip the color of nicotine. He bags it before he blinks, because blinking is for later, because chain of custody is a religion with commandments, and this is not the day to sin. At the station, the analyst clears a table no one else is allowed to touch. She cuts the tape with a scalpel. She lifts the lid an inch. The smell is air that left the world years ago and kept its accent inside a folded newspaper clipping with a photo of the vigil where the gym smelled like wax and fear. Under it, a key on a cheap spiral ring, the kind the convenience store sold near the counter, a charm stamped with a first initial and the year 2000 like a coin that never made it to mint. A friendship bracelet, stiffened by time into a small fossil of color, and at the bottom a corner of blue, knit not a sweater too small, a cuff torn clean and folded twice. The analyst does her work without adjectives, she writes. What is she photographs? She tags. She refuses to talk to the objects the way people sometimes talk to bones. She keeps her voice in the room with the living because that is where it is needed. The man hears about the lawn from a guard who does not speak carelessly. He studies the wall as if he could carve an exit. With staring, his lawyer arrives with the particular briskness of someone combating the gravity of bad news with speed. He says they found a container. He says, we will argue chain. We will argue staleness of probable cause. We will say the neighbor's memory about the patch that never greened right is anecdote. Not evidence, we will file suppression. The man nods and does not hear the verbs. He hears tin box and sees his hands moving in the dark in a march that is 2 decades gone. He hears tape tearing against his teeth because his hands shook and he needed his mouth to hold the job still. He hears the dog that night, 2 houses over bark once, and then stop for a reason he could not guess. He hears the old sheriff tell him, "Last week, tell me about the knot," and feels his thumbs begin to trace that nervous seam in his jail pants like an engine searching for idle. The county attorney reads the suppression draft and marks it with a pen that bleeds like a small wound. He writes case law like a row of sandbags. He anticipates counsel's theater and shrinks the stage. He builds a ladder of facts and invites the judge to climb only as high as comfort allows, and then just a little higher. The date for motions is set, and the town learns the difference between evidence and delicacy, between what can be shown in a courtroom and what sits behind a mother's eyes when she walks by a table where a cuff of blue knit sleeps under plastic. The lead detective rehearses his testimony in a hallway that smells like pencil dust and mop. He says taillight, he says digitized tape. He says probability with his mouth and certainty with his spine. The analyst goes over the list of objects from the tin like a bead prayer and reminds herself that each bead touches the next, whether or not a jury feels the chord. Outside, the town invents chores to manage waiting men, fix fences that can hold through a third winter. Women bake bread that remembers hands better than recipes. Teenagers ride bikes past the bank corner and do not look up at the old camera because it has become a mischievous god to them, and you never meet a god's eye unless you want a task. The convenience store clerk lingers by the end of the counter and tells the manager he will cover tonight and tomorrow, because he wants to see new kids buy gummies without their mouths tightening at the bell's chime. He snips thread from the bell string because the noise is too sharp. Now he ties a knot. That is not the knot the man taught the search parties 25 years ago. He ties a bow that comes loose when you pull an anti-knot, a kindness built into habit. The motions hearing is a room held together by verbs and eyes and the quiet of people with coats folded on laps. The defense stands and says, "fruit of the poisonous tree," as if the phrase carries pesticide in its syllables. He says the warrant was overbroad. He says the neighbor's recollection was tainted by headlines. He says the search lacked particularity. He orders his clauses like a soldier lays out kit. The county attorney rises and says the warrant named the lawn patch by dimensions and compass points. He maps it with language until the judge can see the rectangle on the grass. From the bench, he says the tip was recorded before the arrest. He says the neighbor mentioned the salt and the tire ruts. He says nothing about intuition because the law is suspicious of gut and prefers paper and dirt. The judge listens with a face like a clean field, her hands steepled into a roof. Over her notes, she denies suppression with a single sentence that lands like a gate closing. The box breathes again in the evidence room like a quiet witness saying, "I will wait." In a separate, fluorescent universe, the deputy who pulled the welded cavity measures the void with calipers and a patience that would make a watch jealous. He finds nothing but air and one grain of sand that refuses to roll. He collects it anyway and tapes the envelope with the kind of care people save for wedding invitations. He writes a line for the report that sounds like a joke but isn't. "We did not find the body of a crime. We found the absence built to carry it." He places the envelope on the stainless shelf and feels the long animal hum of the building run under his palm. The old sheriff walks through the doorway and nods, 2 men acknowledging a handmade pocket that taught them more about the suspect than any photograph ever could. Reporters begin to ask questions with the edges wrapped in velvet. Will there be a plea? Will the state offer manslaughter? Will the family support a deal? The county attorney says we do not wheel and deal grieving mothers. The mother hears negotiations like thunder in the next county and does not flinch. She unwraps the ribbon bag on the kitchen table while afternoon light works its way across the laminate like a clock that forgot its minute's hand. She touches the plastic window of the bag with the cuff inside and remembers the day she had washed the sweater too hot and the cuff had tightened. She had laughed, said we will call it fitted. And her daughter had rolled her eyes and said, fitted is not a personality. The father mends a screen door that never learned to stay on its track and thinks how maintenance is a devotion. Church forgot to canonize. The man receives 2 letters in the same mail. Round 1 is from a stranger who writes forgiveness in sentences so soft they nearly float off the page, who tells him accidents happen and the Lord knows intent. Who does not know about the clinic tile stain or the knot. or the comet tail light. The other is from nobody. No signature block letters, 3 words only. Midnight arrest shocks. He reads them until the words wear thin, and he presses the page against the metal bench and rubs until ink shadows his palm. He realizes the sentence in the headline never finished, because community is the last word, and it lives outside this room. The lawyer tells him letters are not evidence. The man tells the lawyer the sentence under the headline in his head has a period, and he does not know when it arrived. Trial is scheduled for spring because calendars are cruel in that practical way. They pretend the seasons are the only weather. The lead detective builds a wall of boxes in his office and labels them not with names, but with verbs found tied. Drove Doug-stitched, clicked, blinked. He does not label the box that holds the blue cuff, because nouns are enough. The analyst runs a last suite of tests on the key from the tin and finds the ghost of oil that matches the brand. The convenience store sold nothing dramatic, just a small echo enough that a juror who once worked a register might nod. The county attorney writes his opening in a voice that is not ceremony and not vengeance. He writes it in the voice of a ditch, tired of being misunderstood. On Main Street, a bench appears near the bank, not by order, but by hands. A plaque engraved with a name is screwed into wood that will weather and gray and keep its dignity. The old sheriff passes and touches the top like a person palming a horse's neck. The town learns to sit without a candle in daylight and let quiet hold a boy who had held a sign last week, sits and ties a ribbon on his wrist in a knot that is not neat. That will slip if pulled. He does not know why he chooses that knot and does not need to. A girl sits beside him and reads a true crime paperback and closes it because the voice in her town has a better narrator than the one in her book. The lake beyond the corner lies flat a coin that will never be flipped again because the outcome is already known and no one here wants to play best 2 out of 3. The defense hires an expert who will say tape is fickle. Pixels lie, compression artifacts dress themselves as clues. He will use diagrams and a pointer and a tone designed to anesthetize curiosity. The county attorney is ready with frames. The analyst is ready with math. The lead detective is ready with the patient insistence of a man who has stared at the same small comet until it became a star he could point to for anyone who doubts the retired nurse buys a new blouse and laughs at herself for thinking about it. She reminds her mouth she does not need to perform. She needs to say what she wrote, and step down. The convenience store clerk finds the old receipt tape and practices saying 2243 without letting his voice shake on the 3. The father tries on a shirt that fits wrong since his shoulders changed shape with the years he irons. Anyway, the mother leaves the ribbon bag on the chair because she wants the house to feel like it is attending to. Night arrives without ceremony and brings a visitor. The wind that used to carry siren wails from the highway when the gym held candles now carries nothing but cold. The lead detective stands on his porch and hears an absence that feels holy. He thinks of the first week again of dogs that went quiet at the service road of a map. That was a riddle of parents who learned a new grammar where every sentence was missing its noun. He thinks of how the word solved looks, printed next to cold case on national sites, how it fits. And doesn't he send a brief text to the analyst? Just a thank you, 1 word. No punctuation. She reads it in a lab where machines hum like well-fed animals and smiles at a whiteboard where pH numbers and dye migration curves rest like lines of a poem written by a chemist who refused metaphor. The man sleeps and wakes and cannot tell which is which, because the ditch now visits both states in sleep. It is a dark mouth that pulls in, waking. It is a geography lesson with angles he can recite. He imagines spring and thinks of the lake loosening its skin. He imagines that sound and hears handcuffs. Instead, he imagines the aisle. He walked in the community center between candle rows and sees only the ribbon twitching in a draft that wasn't there. He imagines an opening statement and hears the word accident collapse into dust. He closes his eyes and tries to build a door out of sentences. He opens them to cinder block that has no appetite for carpentry. Somewhere a teacher writes, "Closure is a story we tell nerves" on a chalkboard and wipes it away because her students have learned too many new words this year. Somewhere a mechanic tightens a bolt on a stranger's car and thinks balance is a fine noun, but torque is what keeps wheels honest. Somewhere the old sheriff sleeps in a chair by his front window because the light outside feels like a guard, and because he promised himself he would rest when the first honest quiet arrived, and it almost has somewhere. The mother flips the kitchen radio on low and lets the weather talk, highs and lows, chants of flurries, wind, advisory by morning. She nods, because wind, she understands, it has always moved through this house. It moves now through a ribbon sealed in a bag she has not opened and may never open. It moves along a porch step. A retired man finally repaired it, moves the headlines on a phone. She does not check after dark. It moves the word community across lips that were numb for years and can form it again. And the voice you have been following, the one that calls you closer without shouting, the one that stands at the culvert and points with a steady hand as if pointing, could be Mercy keeps speaking, not for drama, not for appetite, but because telling makes a map you can fold and put in a pocket. For the walk ahead, it says, spring will come. It says trial is not a finish. It says justice is a winter road, plowed, salted, still slick, in places manageable. If you drive like you learned something, it says cold case solved is a headline and a compass, not a bed. It says keep your eyes open when the lake sings. It says the ditch remembers, the ribbon remembers, the town remembers, and remembering is the only way through.